In the elegant dining room of a Pacific Heights mansion, a successful tech entrepreneur was about to challenge the wrong person. What started as a celebratory family dinner took a shocking turn when he came face to face with the true architect of his success. Marcus Chen wasn't your typical startup founder. For 3 years, he had spent his life building what he believed was an independent tech empire. Known for his innovative AI logistics platform and fierce determination to succeed without help. When he encountered his mother's latest business suggestions and told Elena Chen to stay out of his business, he had no idea he was walking into a carefully orchestrated trap. Marcus delivered an ultimatum that would lead to the complete unraveling of everything he thought he knew about his life. What began as a son's desperate bid for independence would become a masterclass in psychological manipulation. The San Francisco tech world would never be the same after Elena revealed that every success, every contract, and every achievement had been puppeteered from the shadows by the woman he'd just tried to dismiss. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. In 24 hours, Marcus Chen would discover that sometimes the person who loves you most is also the one who controls you completely, and that telling a master manipulator to stay out of your business is the fastest way to learn who actually owns it. Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he raised his wine glass in Elena Chen's Pacific Heights dining room. "To innovate tech," he announced. "After 3 years, we've just signed with Meridian Global. This changes everything." Sarah Rodriguez forced a smile from across the mahogany table, her usual confidence replaced by something Marcus couldn't identify. She kept glancing toward Elena with an expression that seemed almost guilty. "Congratulations, dear," Elena said, her silver hair gleaming under the chandelier. At 58, she remained formidable, every inch the immigrant success story, who'd built an empire through calculated decisions. "Though I do have thoughts about leveraging this opportunity." Marcus felt the familiar knot in his stomach. "Mom, tonight is about celebrating." "Of course," Elena interrupted, "but that Soma office won't impress Meridian's executives. I know a perfect location in the financial district. Better address, better impression." "The office is fine," Marcus said sharply. "We just renewed our lease." "And your new hire, that developer with the thin resume? Perhaps I could recommend more experienced candidates. I know several firms." "Mom." Marcus's voice cut through her suggestion like a blade. "I didn't ask for your input on hiring decisions." Sarah gripped her water glass, watching Elena's reaction with growing unease. Instead of hurt or anger, Elena's expression remained eerily composed, the look of someone who'd been anticipating this moment. "I'm only trying to help," Elena said calmly. "Building a successful company requires more than good technology. You need the right connections, the right mother controlling every decision?" The words erupted from Marcus, 28 years of suffocation reaching a breaking point. "For once in my life, can't you just let me succeed on my own terms?" "I see," Elena said softly, setting down her wine glass. "You believe you've done this all on your own." "I have," Marcus insisted. "Every line of code, every client meeting, every sleepless night, that was me and Sarah and our team, not you. For the first time, I've built something that's actually mine." Elena studied her son with the intensity she'd once used analyzing quarterly reports during her climb through San Francisco's import-export industry. "Your company, your success, your independence." She nodded thoughtfully. "How wonderfully naive." Marcus pushed back from the table. "I'm not naive, Mom. I'm finally free. And I'm tired of you managing every aspect of my life like I'm still 8 years old." 8 years old, Elena mused. "Yes, that's when your father decided he needed freedom too. Interesting how history repeats itself." The comparison hit. like a physical blow. James Chen had walked out when Marcus was 8, claiming he needed to find himself. The parallel Elena was drawing was deliberate and cruel. "I'm not abandoning anyone," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "I'm asking you to respect boundaries, to stay out of my business." Elena rose gracefully, moving to the window overlooking the city lights. Her reflection looked ghostly in the glass. "Stay out of your business," she repeated, barely above a whisper. When she turned back, her smile was serene and terrifying. What an interesting choice of words. Sarah felt ice run down her spine. There was something in Elena's tone, a quiet certainty that suggested she knew something Marcus didn't. The secret arrangement Elena had offered her 3 years ago suddenly felt like a trap closing around them all. "You know what, Mom? I'm done." Marcus grabbed his jacket, movements sharp with fury. "I came to share good news, not get another lecture about not living up to your expectations." Elena watched his outburst with detached interest. "Of course, dear. You're absolutely right. Your business is your business." The agreement should have felt like victory. Instead, it sent ice through Marcus's veins. In 28 years, Elena Chen had never conceded an argument this easily. "Sarah, are you coming?" Sarah hesitated, caught between loyalty to Marcus and the complex web binding her to Elena. "I'll catch up later. I should help clean up." Marcus stared, hurt flickering across his features. Sarah had never stayed behind after his confrontations with Elena, but he was too angry to process the implications. "Fine," he said curtly. "See you tomorrow." The front door slammed like a gunshot. Elena watched Marcus's BMW disappear into the San Francisco night before turning back to Sarah, who sat frozen at the table. "He's so much like his father," Elena said conversationally, clearing plates with mechanical precision. "So convinced of his independence, so certain he's built something real." She held Marcus's untouched wine glass to the light. "It's almost endearing." "Elena, maybe you should—" Sarah began. "Should what?" Elena's tone remained pleasant, but steel lay underneath. Let him continue his fantasy? Let him believe his success is genuine? She moved to an antique desk, pulling out a leather portfolio Sarah recognized with dread. "Or should I teach him what the real world looks like?" Elena opened the portfolio, revealing documents Sarah had hoped never to see. Corporate filings, financial records, legal agreements, all bearing shell corporation names connected to Elena's business network. At the top sat Innovate Tech's incorporation paperwork, but the signatures and funding sources weren't what Marcus believed. 3 years, Elena said, running fingers over documents like a pianist caressing keys. 3 years of letting him play entrepreneur while I pulled every string, removed every obstacle, paved every road. She looked up with eyes holding no warmth. "Do you know what it cost me to maintain that illusion? The favors called in, competitors, eliminated investors convinced to step aside so my shell companies could fund his venture?" Sarah's hands trembled as Elena's manipulation's full scope became clear. She'd known about the financial arrangements, that was their deal. But seeing the systematic paperwork was like watching a magic trick explained in horrifying detail. "He needed to learn this lesson eventually," Elena continued with a teacher's patience. "Men in our family bite the hand that feeds them. James did when he left. Marcus just did tonight. But unlike James, Marcus will learn exactly what happens when you tell Elena Chen to stay out of your business." Elena reached for her phone, speed dialing with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched in horrified fascination as Elena transformed from disappointed mother to corporate predator. "Mr. Patterson, Elena Chen. I need you to schedule a meeting with the tenant in Suite 402 tomorrow morning, the technology company. There will be changes to lease terms. No, effective immediately." As Elena made more calls, lawyers, business contacts, names Sarah recognized from financial pages, the true architecture of Marcus's independence crumbled. Every call removed another pillar from his life's foundation. Sarah sat paralyzed, watching Elena orchestrate the systematic dismantling of her business partner's world. The woman who'd paid for her mother's cancer treatments, eliminated her student debt, offered financial security for simple information, was revealing herself as something far more dangerous than a controlling mother. Elena was a puppet master who'd spent 3 years letting Marcus believe he danced freely, only to reveal every step had been choreographed. When Elena finally set down her phone, the dining room fell silent. She looked at Sarah with the same pleasant expression worn throughout dinner, as if she hadn't just set Marcus's destruction in motion. "Now then," Elena said, refilling her wine glass with steady hands. "Shall we discuss tomorrow's agenda?" Marcus's hand still trembled with residual anger as he inserted his keycard into Innovate Tech's office building the next morning. The familiar beep and green light should have been reassuring, a symbol of the independence he'd fought for the night before. Instead, the sound felt hollow, echoing in the empty lobby at 7 a.m. like a warning he couldn't quite interpret. The confrontation with Elena had left him restless, pacing his apartment until 3 in the morning, replaying every word of their exchange. Her final agreement, "Your business is your business," had felt wrong somehow, like a chess master announcing checkmate before revealing their winning move. But in the harsh light of morning, Marcus convinced himself he was overthinking. Elena's calm acceptance was probably just shock at finally being challenged directly. He rode the elevator to the 4th floor, watching the numbers climb with a satisfaction that felt forced. This was his building, his company, his future. Elena's decades of control ended here, in this steel and glass monument to his own capabilities. The elevator doors opened with their usual whisper, but something immediately felt off. The hallway seemed too quiet, lacking the familiar hum of early morning productivity that usually greeted him. Marcus's footsteps echoed strangely as he walked toward Innovate Tech's glass doors, his confidence wavering with each step. "Mr. Chen?" Marcus turned to find Harold Patterson, the building's property manager, emerging from the stairwell with a manila folder clutched against his chest. Patterson was a thin, nervous man in his 50s, who normally avoided direct contact with tenants, preferring to handle issues through email and written notices. Seeing him in person, especially this early, sent an inexplicable chill down Marcus's spine. "Mr. Patterson," Marcus replied, forcing a smile. "You're here early." "Yes, well." Patterson's eyes darted around the hallway as if he expected to be overheard. "I need to speak with you about your lease. There's been a development." Marcus felt his stomach clench. What kind of development? Patterson opened the folder with hands that seemed to shake slightly. "The building ownership has changed hands. New management company took over last night. They're reviewing all existing lease agreements." "Last night?" Marcus repeated, his voice climbing in pitch. "Buildings don't change ownership overnight. There are processes, filings, notifications." "I know it seems sudden," Patterson interrupted, his discomfort obvious. "But apparently, this has been in the works for months. The new owners are very thorough. They want to meet with you this morning to discuss modifications to your lease terms." Marcus stared at the documents Patterson held, unable to process what he was hearing. His lease wasn't up for renewal for another 18 months. The terms were locked in, favorable, and had been one of the few business victories he'd achieved without Elena's input, or so he'd believed. "What kind of modifications?" he asked, though part of him already dreaded the answer. Patterson wouldn't meet his eyes. "Rent increases, security deposits, updated insurance requirements." He paused, swallowing hard. They also mentioned something about subleasing restrictions and approval processes for all business activities conducted on the premises. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. Subleasing restrictions would affect his ability to expand. Approval processes for business activities could give his landlord veto power over client meetings, partnerships, even hiring decisions. It was a level of control that would effectively strangle his company's growth. "This is insane," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the empty hallway. "You can't just rewrite lease terms because ownership changed. There are legal protections." "The meeting is at 9, Patterson said, cutting him off with obvious desperation to escape the conversation. "Conference room on the second floor. I'd suggest reviewing your original lease agreement before then. Sometimes there are clauses that tenants overlook." Patterson hurried away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the hallway with a growing sense of dread. He unlocked Innovate Tech's office with fingers that felt numb, stepping into the familiar space that suddenly seemed foreign and vulnerable. The office was exactly as he'd left it. Sleek workstations arranged in collaborative clusters, whiteboards covered with diagrams and code snippets, the espresso machine Sarah had insisted they needed for late-night coding sessions. But now, everything felt precarious, like a house of cards balanced on a shaky foundation. Marcus went straight to his desk and pulled out the lease agreement, spreading the pages across his workspace with trembling hands. He'd read this document dozens of times during the negotiation process, but now he found himself studying every clause with paranoid intensity. There, buried in subsection 12C, was language about material change in ownership structure that could trigger reasonable modifications to existing terms. The legal language was dense and confusing, but Marcus was beginning to understand that reasonable could mean whatever the new owners wanted it to mean. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, but Marcus answered anyway, hoping for some kind of explanation that would make sense of the morning's chaos. "Mr. Chen? This is Jennifer Walsh from Meridian Global. I need to speak with you about our partnership agreement." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike. Meridian Global, the Fortune 500 company whose partnership had been the centerpiece of last night's celebration. "Ms. Walsh, good to hear from you. I assume you're calling about implementation timelines?" "Actually, Mr. Chen, I'm calling because our legal department has some concerns about your company's corporate structure. We need to verify the decision-making authority for this partnership." The words seemed to echo from a great distance. "Decision-making authority? I'm the CEO and founder of Innovate Tech. All partnership decisions go through me." "Yes, that's what we understood as well. But we've received some conflicting information about your company's ownership structure. Our legal team needs to speak directly with the actual controlling parties before we can proceed." Marcus's office seemed to tilt around him. Conflicting information? From whom? "I'm not at liberty to discuss our sources, Mr. Chen, but until we can verify the chain of command, we'll need to put the partnership on hold. I'm sure you understand our position." The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone in disbelief. The Meridian partnership, the deal that represented 3 years of work, the validation of everything he'd built, was suddenly in jeopardy because of questions about his own authority over his own company. Marcus tried calling Sarah, but it went straight to voicemail. Her absence from the office, which he'd initially attributed to their late night at Elena's house, now felt ominous. Sarah was never late, never unreachable, never absent without explanation. The next hour passed in a blur of increasingly desperate phone calls. Innovate Tech's bank wanted to review their credit facilities. Their insurance company needed to update their coverage based on new information about the company's risk profile. Even their internet service provider called about irregularities in their service agreement. With each call, Marcus felt his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Every person who spoke to him seemed to know something he didn't, to have received information that contradicted his understanding of his own business. By 8:30, Marcus was pacing his office like a caged animal, his mind racing through possibilities. Corporate espionage? A coordinated attack by competitors? Some kind of elaborate misunderstanding that would resolve itself once he explained the situation? But deep in his gut, a terrible suspicion was growing. The timing was too perfect, too coordinated. Less than 12 hours after telling Elena to stay out of his business, his entire professional world was suddenly questioning his authority and control. Marcus grabbed his laptop and began searching public records for information about his building's ownership. What he found made his hands shake. The building had indeed been sold to Pacific Holdings LLC, a company that existed only on paper. The transfer had been completed at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, less than 2 hours after he'd stormed out of Elena's house. A name search for Pacific Holdings LLC led to a maze of shell corporations and holding companies, each one registered to anonymous P.O. boxes and corporate law firms. But Marcus recognized the pattern, the same labyrinthine structure Elena used for her import-export business, designed to obscure true ownership while maintaining absolute control. His phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Sarah's number. "Marcus?" Sarah's voice was strained, barely above a whisper. "We need to talk. Not at the office, not on the phone. Can you meet me at Cafe Luna in 20 minutes? "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" "The building, Meridian. Everything's falling apart." 20 minutes, Sarah repeated, and the line went dead. Marcus sat in his office chair, surrounded by the trappings of success that now felt like elaborate props in a play he hadn't known. He was performing. The Meridian partnership that was supposed to change everything. The lease that had seemed so favorable. The funding that had appeared exactly when he needed it, from investors who'd seemed impressed by his vision. How much of it had been real? How much had been carefully orchestrated by the woman he'd told to stay out of his business? Marcus's reflection stared back at him from his computer screen, the face of a man who was beginning to understand that his entire adult life might have been an illusion. In the distance, he could hear the elevator doors opening as other tenants arrived for their normal workday, unaware that the young tech entrepreneur on the 4th floor was discovering that independence was far more fragile than he'd ever imagined. The clock on his desk read 8:45 a.m. In 15 minutes, he had a meeting about lease modifications that could destroy his company. In 20 minutes, he had a conversation with Sarah that might destroy his understanding of everything else. Marcus Chen, who had spent the night believing he'd finally achieved freedom, was about to learn that some cages are invisible until you try to leave them. Marcus's hands were still shaking as he pushed through the glass doors of Cafe Luna, the familiar scent of espresso and pastries doing nothing to calm his nerves. Sarah sat in the corner booth they'd claimed countless times during their early partnership days. But today, everything felt different, tainted by the morning's revelations and the growing certainty that his world was collapsing in ways he didn't understand. Sarah looked up as he approached, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands wrapped around her coffee cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth through her palms. Marcus had never seen his business partner look so defeated. "Sarah, what's happening?" Marcus slid into the booth across from her, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "The building, Meridian. Everyone's questioning my authority over my own company. It's like someone's orchestrating. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Marcus, stop." Sarah's voice cut through his frantic explanation. She looked around the cafe nervously, as if expecting to see Elena's agents monitoring their conversation. "Before you say anything else, you need to understand something. This isn't random. This isn't a series of coincidences." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean?" Sarah's phone buzzed on the table between them. She glanced at the screen and her face went pale. "David Kim. He's been trying to reach you all morning." "David Kim?" Marcus frowned. "The venture capitalist who wanted to invest last year? Why would he be calling now?" "Because he never stopped watching your company. Sarah said quietly. And because I called him this morning and told him you needed help. Before Marcus could respond, a tall figure approached their table. David Kim was exactly as Marcus remembered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making million-dollar decisions. His expression, however, was grim. "Marcus," David said, extending his hand, "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." "David, I appreciate you coming, but I'm not sure what Sarah told you." "She told me enough." David slid into the booth next to Sarah, producing a tablet from his briefcase with practiced efficiency. "Tell me, Marcus, what do you know about your company's actual funding sources?" Marcus felt a familiar defensive bristle. "I know everything about my funding. I've raised capital through 3 rounds, secured bridge financing, negotiated terms." With whom?" David's question was sharp, cutting through Marcus's automatic response. "Name the actual investors. Not the fund names, not the LLC designations. The actual human beings who wrote the checks." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then found himself struggling to recall specific names. The funding had always been handled through intermediaries, law firms, investment advisors, corporate entities with impressive letterhead but faceless representatives. "I have all the documentation," Marcus said weakly. "The wire transfers, the legal agreements." "Show me." David's bluntness was unsettling, but Marcus pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his files. As he read the names of his supposed investors, David's expression grew increasingly troubled. "Meridian Capital Ventures," David repeated when Marcus finished. "Pacific Investment Group, Pinnacle Holdings. Marcus, I've been in venture capital for 15 years. I know every significant fund on the West Coast. None of these entities exist." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "That's impossible. I've received funding, I've had meetings. With whom? When? Where?" Marcus tried to remember specific faces, specific conversations. But as he searched his memory, he realized most of his funding meetings had been conducted through intermediaries. Lawyers who spoke for absent principals, financial advisors who represented private investors who preferred to remain anonymous, conference calls with voices he'd never connected to actual human beings. David was already typing on his tablet, his fingers moving with the speed of someone conducting due diligence. "Let me show you something. This is the corporate registry for Meridian Capital Ventures." He turned the screen toward Marcus. "Incorporated 6 months before your first funding round. Single shareholder listed as another shell corporation. Registered address is a mail forwarding service in Delaware." Sarah watched Marcus's face as the implications sank in. She'd known this moment would come eventually, but seeing the devastation in his eyes made her feel sick with guilt. "Pacific Investment Group," David continued, pulling up another record. "Same pattern. Incorporated specifically to fund your company, dissolved immediately after the final wire transfer. The money trail leads back to a network of holding companies that would make a forensic accountant weep with frustration." Marcus felt reality shifting beneath him like sand. But the money was real. The funding actually happened. "I built the company." "You built something," David agreed. "But the question is, with whose money and under whose control?" He leaned forward, his expression both professional and sympathetic. "Marcus, in 15 years of venture capital, I've never seen a funding structure this deliberately obfuscated unless someone wanted to hide the true source of investment." "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you get out of helping me?" David and Sarah exchanged a look that Marcus couldn't interpret. There was something they weren't telling him, some piece of the puzzle he was still missing. "Because," David said carefully, "I tried to invest in your company last year. Remember? I offered you $2 million in Series A funding. You turned me down. Marcus nodded slowly. Our legal team said we already had sufficient capital. Marcus, David interrupted. You don't have a legal team. You have a single attorney who's been handling all your corporate filings. I looked into him this morning. He's employed by a law firm that specializes in creating and managing shell corporations for wealthy clients who want to control assets without revealing their involvement. The cafe seemed to spin around Marcus. Every foundation of his success was crumbling, revealing the elaborate scaffolding of deception that had been supporting his life. Who is it? Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer. Who's been funding my company? Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were cold and trembling. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I should have told you years ago. I wanted to tell you, but the money for my mother's treatments, my student loans. Sarah, who is it? David pulled up one more document on his tablet, a corporate filing that showed the ultimate ownership structure of the shell corporations. At the top of the labyrinthine chart was a name that made Marcus's blood freeze. Elena Chen, listed as the sole beneficial owner of Pacific Holdings, LLC. Your mother, David said quietly. Every dollar that's ever funded Innovate Tech has come from your mother's business empire. She's been using shell corporations to hide her involvement, but the money trail is clear once you know where to look. Marcus stared at the screen, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. That's impossible. She would have told me. She wouldn't have lied about something this fundamental. Wouldn't she? Sarah's voice was thick with guilt and sorrow. Marcus, she's been paying me to report on your progress for 3 years. Monthly reports about your business decisions, your personal relationships, your plans for the company. She knows everything. The betrayal hit Marcus in waves. First his mother, then his business partner, then the realization that his entire adult life had been a carefully orchestrated lie. He felt like he was drowning in plain sight, surrounded by people who'd been watching him struggle while knowing exactly how to save him, and choosing not to. The building sale, Marcus said numbly. The Meridian partnership being questioned. This morning's phone calls. All her, David confirmed. She's systematically removing the support structures she put in place, forcing you to confront the reality of your situation. But why? Marcus's voice cracked. Why would she do this to me? Sarah squeezed his hand tighter. Because you told her to stay out of your business. Because Elena Chen doesn't get told what to do by anyone. Not even her son. Because she wants you to understand exactly how much control she's always had. Marcus pulled his hand away from Sarah's, standing abruptly from the booth. The other cafe patrons looked up at the scraping sound of his chair, but he barely noticed. His entire world had just been revealed as an elaborate puppet show, and he'd been the only one who didn't know he was dancing on strings. I need to think, he said, his voice sounding strange and distant even to himself. I need to figure out what's real and what isn't. David stood as well, his expression compassionate but determined. Marcus, if you want to fight this, if you want to build something that's actually yours, I can help. Real investment, real partnership, real independence. But you need to understand what you're up against. What do you mean? David's smile was grim. Elena Chen didn't build her empire by being sentimental. If she's willing to destroy everything she's created for you just to prove a point, there's no telling how far she'll go to maintain control. This isn't just about your business anymore. This is about whether you're willing to lose everything to find out who you really are without her influence. Marcus looked back at Sarah, who was crying silently into her coffee cup, then at David, whose offer of genuine help felt both like salvation and another potential trap. Finally, he looked out the cafe window toward the downtown skyline where his office building stood, its glass facade gleaming in the morning sun like a monument to his own naivety. Somewhere in that maze of steel and ambition, Elena Chen was probably sitting in a boardroom, orchestrating the next phase of his education in the realities of power and control. The question was whether Marcus had the courage to walk away from everything he thought he'd built to discover what he might actually be capable of creating on his own. "I'll call you," Marcus told David, then walked out of the cafe into the bright San Francisco morning, carrying with him the devastating knowledge that his independence had always been an illusion, and wondering if true freedom was worth the price Elena was demanding he pay for it. Marcus's footsteps echoed through Innovate Tech's empty office as evening shadows crept across the glass walls. The cleaning crew had finished hours ago, leaving behind the antiseptic smell of industrial, cleaner and the hollow silence of a workspace abandoned by its inhabitants. He'd been walking the halls for 20 minutes, his mind churning through David Kim's revelations, unable to sit still long enough to process the magnitude of his mother's deception. The corporate documents David had shown him were spread across the conference table like evidence at a crime scene: shell corporations, hidden ownership structures, financial trails that led back to Elena's business empire. Each page represented another lie, another carefully constructed illusion that had shaped his adult life. Sarah's keycard beeped in the hallway, followed by the soft whisper of the glass doors opening. Marcus didn't turn around as her footsteps approached the conference room. He'd been expecting her, hoping for her, despite everything. If anyone could help him understand how deep this deception ran, it was the person who'd been living inside it for 3 years. "You came back," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent the day preparing for a conversation she'd been dreading for years. "Where else would I go?" Marcus's laugh was bitter. "This is the only place I thought was actually mine. Turns out even that was an illusion." Sarah moved to the opposite side of the conference table, her hands clasped in front of her like a penitent seeking absolution. In the dim light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she looked fragile and young. Nothing like the confident developer who'd helped him build their AI platform from the ground up. "Marcus, I need to tell you everything. All of it. Not just the parts David figured out, but the whole truth about how this started." Marcus finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "How long have you known? About the funding? About her control over everything?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "From the beginning." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself, his knuckles white against the black leather. "From the beginning? You mean, I mean before you hired me, before we ever met." Sarah's composure cracked, tears starting to track down her cheeks. "Elena approached me while I was still finishing my master's degree at Stanford. My mother had just been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. The treatments weren't covered by insurance, and I was drowning in student debt." Marcus sank into the chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. "She recruited you." "She said she had a son who was starting a tech company. Someone brilliant but naive about business realities. She offered to pay off my loans and cover my mother's medical expenses in exchange for joining your team and providing regular updates about your progress." The conference room felt like it was shrinking around Marcus. Every shared late night, coding session, every celebration of a breakthrough, every moment of genuine partnership, all of it contaminated by the knowledge that Sarah had been reporting back to Elena. "The updates," Marcus said numbly. "What did you tell her?" Sarah pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through what appeared to be dozens of email chains. "Everything. Your hiring decisions, your strategic plans, your personal relationships. She wanted to know about your stress levels, your confidence, your fears about the business." She held out the phone, and Marcus could see months of detailed reports written in Sarah's precise technical language. Subject lines like "Weekly Progress Report, Week 47, and Concerns re Client Acquisition Strategy" filled the screen. Jesus. Sarah. Marcus pushed the phone away, unable to read anymore. "You've been spying on me for 3 years." It wasn't supposed to be like this, Sarah said desperately. At first, I told myself I was just providing business updates. Elena made it sound like she was a silent investor looking out for your interests. But as time went on, she wanted more detail, more personal information. Marcus stood and walked to the window, staring out at the San Francisco skyline. The city lights twinkled below like stars, each one representing someone living their life without the knowledge that their reality was being manipulated by unseen forces. "The Meridian deal," he said without turning around. "You knew she would sabotage it." "I suspected." Sarah's voice was thick with guilt. "When you told her to stay out of your business, I knew she would retaliate. I tried calling you this morning to warn you, but everything was happening so fast." "Warn me!" Marcus spun around, his composure finally cracking. "You could have warned me 3 years ago. You could have told me the truth about the funding, about her control, about any of it. I tried." Sarah shot to her feet, her own emotions finally boiling over. "Do you think this was easy for me? Watching you pour your heart into building something while knowing it was all orchestrated? I tried to quit twice, but what?" Sarah's shoulders sagged in defeat. "My mother's cancer came back last year, more aggressive this time. Elena's paying for experimental treatments that cost $30,000 a month. I couldn't walk away." The raw pain in Sarah's voice cut through Marcus's anger, replacing it with a more complex mix of betrayal and understanding. He'd met Sarah's mother several times, a warm, intelligent woman who'd raised Sarah alone after her father's death. The thought of Elena using that relationship as leverage made him sick. "So you chose her," Marcus said quietly. "I chose my mother's life," Sarah corrected. "But Marcus, you have to understand. Elena genuinely believes she's protecting you. In her mind, everything she's done has been to ensure your success." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Protecting me? She's destroyed everything I thought I'd accomplished. Because you challenged her authority, because you told her to stay out of your business without understanding that she is your business." Sarah moved closer, her voice urgent. "Marcus, Elena didn't just fund Innovate Tech. She's been orchestrating your entire career path since college." The room seemed to tilt around Marcus. "What do you mean?" Sarah pulled up another file on her phone, this one containing what appeared to be academic records and job application materials. "Your internship at Google during junior year? Elena knew someone on the hiring committee. Your first job at the startup in Palo Alto? Elena was a silent investor in that company too. Even your decision to start Innovate Tech, she'd been feeding you market research and industry insights for months before you thought of the idea yourself." Marcus felt like he was drowning in revelations, each new piece of information pulling him deeper into the realization that his entire adult life had been a carefully orchestrated performance. "The AI platform," he said weakly. "The code we wrote." "That was real," Sarah said quickly. "Your technical skills, your vision for the product, your innovation, none of that was fabricated. But Elena made sure you had the resources, the connections, and the market conditions to succeed." Marcus slumped back into his chair, his head in his hands. "So what am I? Just a puppet dancing on strings she's been pulling for a decade?" "You're someone with genuine talent who's been given opportunities to use it," Sarah said carefully. "But Marcus, Elena's not going to stop here. Destroying the Meridian deal and threatening your lease, that's just the beginning. She's going to systematically dismantle everything until you come back to her and acknowledge her control. Or until I walk away completely." Sarah's expression grew troubled. "She won't let you walk away. I've seen the contingency plans she's developed. If you try to start over independently, she has the resources to destroy your reputation, blacklist you from the industry, even pursue legal action for breach of fiduciary duty." Marcus looked up sharply. "Legal action? The shell corporations that funded Innovate Tech technically own the intellectual property you've developed. If Elena wanted to, she could claim you've been misappropriating corporate assets. The trap was even more sophisticated than Marcus had imagined. Elena hadn't just created an illusion of independence. She'd built a cage so elaborate that escape seemed impossible without losing everything he'd worked for. "There has to be a way out," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah sat down across from him, her expression mixing hope with desperation. "David Kim thinks there might be. He's been studying Elena's corporate structure all day. He believes there are ways to challenge the shell corporation arrangements, especially if we can prove fraudulent concealment of material facts." "We?" "I'm done, Marcus. I can't keep living this lie, and I can't keep watching Elena destroy you to prove a point. My mother's treatments." Sarah's voice broke slightly. "David's offered to help with the medical costs if I testify about Elena's manipulation." Marcus studied Sarah's face, searching for any sign of another deception. But what he saw was someone who'd been carrying the weight of an impossible choice for years, finally ready to sacrifice her own security for the truth. "If we do this," Marcus said slowly, "if we try to fight her, there's no going back. Elena doesn't forgive betrayal." "I know." Sarah's voice was steady now, resolved. "But I'd rather face her anger than watch her turn you into a prisoner of her love." Marcus looked around the conference room one last time, at the whiteboards covered with their breakthrough algorithms, at the prototypes of devices that represented months of collaborative innovation, at the space where he'd believed he was building his future. Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether to fight for the illusion of independence Elena had created, or risk everything to discover what he might accomplish on his own. "Call David," Marcus said finally. "Tell him we're ready to hear his plan." As Sarah reached for her phone, Marcus felt something shift inside him, a mixture of terror and determination he hadn't experienced since childhood. For the first time in his adult life, he was about to make a choice without Elena's influence, without her safety net, without the comfortable certainty that someone else was ultimately responsible for the consequences. It was the most frightening and liberating feeling he'd ever experienced. Marcus's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel outside Elena's Pacific Heights mansion. 24 hours ago, he'd driven away believing he'd finally achieved independence. Now he was returning with the devastating knowledge that his entire adult life had been an elaborate performance. Sarah sat beside him, pale but resolute. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said quietly. "Yes, I do," Sarah replied. "I helped create this situation." They found Elena in her home office, surrounded by financial reports and glowing computer screens. She looked up with the serene expression of someone who'd anticipated this confrontation. "Sarah," Elena said pleasantly, "I trust your mother's treatment is progressing well?" The casual threat made Sarah flinch, but she remained standing. "Elena," Marcus said, clutching David Kim's folder. "I know about the shell corporations, Pacific Holdings, Meridian Capital Ventures, all of it. Every dollar that funded Innovate Tech came from you." Elena's smile never wavered. "Yes, I imagine David Kim was thorough, though I'm surprised it took him this long to uncover the structure." The casual admission hit Marcus like a physical blow. "How long have you been controlling my life?" Elena withdrew a thick leather portfolio from her desk, opening it to reveal pages of corporate filings, academic records, and financial agreements. "Do you remember your acceptance to Stanford?" Elena asked conversationally, producing his acceptance, letter alongside a canceled check for $50,000 to the Stanford Alumni Development Fund, dated 2 weeks earlier. "Your Google internship, the startup job in Palo Alto. Even the market research that inspired Innovate Tech. My analysts identified that opportunity 6 months before you thought you'd discovered it yourself." Each document was another nail in Marcus's self-concept. Elena laid them out methodically, her tone warm and maternal. But the technology, the actual innovation, Marcus said desperately. That was genuinely yours, Elena said with authentic pride. Your technical abilities, your vision, none of that was fabricated. I simply ensured you had resources to develop those gifts. You call systematic deception providing resources? Sarah asked angrily. Elena's gaze shifted with laser-like intensity. I call it love, Miss Rodriguez, the kind that sacrifices everything to ensure a child never experiences failure or crushing disappointment. Even if it means they never experience genuine success? Marcus asked. Elena's composure flickered. You think what you've accomplished isn't real because I provided the foundation? The recognition, the innovation, the lives your technology will improve, all meaningless because your mother ensured you had support? She moved to the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. Let me tell you about genuine failure, Marcus. Your father knew all about that. James Chen chose genuine struggle over support, and where did it lead? 20 years of failed ventures and a son wondering why his father abandoned him. Elena turned back, raw pain visible in her eyes for the first time. Every decision I made was to ensure you'd never face that uncertainty. Every string I pulled, every obstacle removed, all so you could succeed without the crushing weight of potential failure. But it wasn't real success, Marcus said. Elena returned to her desk, producing a final document that made Marcus's blood run cold. Beneficial Ownership Transfer Agreement, outlining how all of Innovate Tech's assets would revert to Elena's control. Real success is understanding who holds power, Elena said, sliding the contract toward him. You can sign this, acknowledging my ownership while continuing as CEO with full operational control and generous compensation. And if I don't sign? Elena's smile was serene and terrifying. Then you'll discover what genuine independence costs. I'll exercise my legal rights as true owner. The company, technology, client relationships, all removed from your control. You'll be free to start over with nothing but your authentic abilities. I could fight you, Marcus said quietly. Legally, publicly. Elena laughed genuinely. With what resources? You signed every document, accepted every investment. In the law's eyes, you're an employee given extraordinary opportunities by a generous benefactor. She was right, and they all knew it. Elena had been too careful to leave herself vulnerable. Besides, Elena continued sadly, do you really want to destroy everything we've built just to prove a point? Do you want to hurt people who depend on Innovate Tech? Marcus looked around the office where he'd spent countless childhood evenings watching Elena build her empire. He'd always admired her success, but now understood her greatest achievement was constructing a cage so beautiful its occupant never realized he was trapped. I need time to think, Marcus said finally. Elena nodded graciously. Of course. But remember, every day you delay is another day real competitors gain ground. Indecision is a luxury successful entrepreneurs can't afford. As they left, Elena called after them. Sarah, dear, do give my regards to your mother. I hope her treatments continue going well. The subtle threat was unmistakable. Even in defeat, Elena reminded them her reach extended beyond Marcus's choices, touching everyone they cared about. Walking to the car in silence, Marcus realized choosing independence wouldn't just risk his future, it meant accepting responsibility. For collateral damage Elena was prepared to inflict on anyone standing in her way. The puppet master had revealed her strings, but cutting them would require courage Marcus wasn't sure he possessed. Marcus sat in his BMW outside Elena's house, the engine off, staring at the ownership transfer agreement through the windshields. Reflection. Sarah had gone inside to use the bathroom, leaving him alone with thoughts that felt like they were tearing him apart. Every choice felt like a trap, Sign Elena's contract and live as a comfortable prisoner, walk away and lose everything he'd worked for, or fight a battle he couldn't win. His phone buzzed with a text from David Kim. Legal team reviewing options. Don't sign anything yet. The irony wasn't lost on him. Even his potential escape route involved depending on someone else's resources and expertise. Would he ever make a truly independent decision? A familiar sound made him look up, the rumble of a motorcycle engine echoing off the mansion's walls. But this wasn't Elena's usual evening routine. A dark Harley-Davidson pulled into the circular driveway, followed by an older Toyota Camry that had seen better years. Marcus watched with growing confusion as two figures dismounted. A man in his 50s wearing a leather jacket and weathered jeans, and a teenager with Elena's sharp features but defiant posture. The man removed his helmet, revealing graying hair and a face Marcus recognized from faded photographs. Older now, lined with years of uncertainty, but unmistakably familiar. James Chen, his father. The man who'd walked out 20 years ago and never looked back. Marcus's hands gripped the steering wheel as memories flooded back. Waiting by the window for a father who never came, birthday parties with an empty chair, Elena's tight-lipped responses whenever he asked when Daddy was coming home. The abandonment had shaped everything about Marcus's relationship with Elena, driving his need to prove he wasn't like James while desperately seeking her approval. The teenager looked to be about 16, with Marcus's height but James's easy smile. The resemblance was undeniable. This had to be Tommy, the half-brother Marcus had discovered existed through social media but never thought he'd meet. Sarah emerged from the house just as James and Tommy reached the front steps. She stopped short, recognizing immediately that this wasn't a coincidence. She called him, Sarah said quietly, sliding back into the passenger seat. This is part of her plan. What plan? Think about it, Marcus. Elena just gave you an ultimatum about independence and responsibility. Now your father, the man whose abandonment justified every controlling decision she's ever made, shows up at the perfect dramatic moment. Sarah's voice carried bitter understanding. She's orchestrating this confrontation to prove her point, about men who walk away from responsibility. Marcus felt a surge of rage at Elena's manipulation, but underneath it was something more complex. Curiosity about the stranger who shared his DNA, and unexpected nervousness about meeting the brother he'd never known existed. We should go, Marcus said, reaching for the ignition. No. Sarah's voice was firm. Don't let her control this moment, too. If you're going to meet your father, do it on your terms, not as part of her psychological theater. Marcus stared at the front door where James and Tommy had just disappeared inside. After 20 years of silence, his father had returned at the exact moment when Marcus was questioning everything about his life and identity. The timing was too perfect to be anything but Elena's design. But Sarah was right. Running away would be letting Elena dictate his choices again. Marcus got out of the car and walked toward the house, his footsteps echoing the same path he'd taken as a child whenever Elena called him in from playing. But this time felt different, charged with the possibility of answers to questions he'd carried for decades. He used his key and stepped into the foyer, immediately hearing voices from the living room. Elena's controlled tones, James's deeper voice carrying notes of defensiveness, and a younger voice that cut through the adult conversation with startling directness. Don't understand why everyone's pretending this is some kind of family reunion, the teenager was saying. You dragged me here to prove some point about responsibility, but all I see are 3 adults who've been lying to each other for 20 years. Marcus stepped into the living room doorway, taking in a scene that felt like a fever dream. Elena sat in her usual chair, composed despite the chaos she'd orchestrated. James stood by the fireplace, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking exactly like Marcus did when he felt cornered. And Tommy sprawled on the couch with the casual insolence of youth, his eyes moving between the adults with barely concealed disgust. "Marcus," James said, his voice catching slightly. You look like your mother when she was your age." The comparison stung. Marcus had spent his life trying not to be like either parent, but apparently he carried both their images in his features. "Hello, James." Marcus couldn't bring himself to say Dad. That title belonged to someone who'd been present for bedtime stories and scraped knees and high school graduations. Tommy looked up from his phone with interest. "So, you're the famous Marcus. Dad's told me about you." "Dad's told you about me?" Marcus couldn't hide his surprise. Every few months he gets drunk and talks about the son he left behind to find himself. Tommy's air quotes were vicious. Usually right before he starts another business that's definitely going to make him rich this time. James flinched. "Tommy, that's enough." "Is it?" Tommy stood, his teenage frame already approaching Marcus's height. "Because I've been listening to this bullshit my whole life. How you had to leave Marcus and Elena because you couldn't handle responsibility. How you've been watching from afar and feeling guilty. How you've wanted to reach out, but didn't know how." Elena watched the exchange with calculating eyes. This was exactly what she'd wanted. The three Chen men in one room, with Tommy serving as the voice of uncomfortable truths no one else would speak. "Tommy's right," James said quietly, his shoulders sagging. "I've been a coward for 20 years. But Elena, when you called and said Marcus was struggling with questions about independence and responsibility," he looked directly at his eldest son. "I couldn't stay away anymore." "She called you," Marcus repeated, pieces clicking into place. "This isn't coincidence. She brought you here to prove that men in our family run away when things get difficult." Elena's smile was serene. "I brought your father here because you needed to understand the choice you're making. Independence sounds noble until you see what it actually costs." "What it cost me," James said, his voice rough with emotion, "was watching my son grow up through newspaper articles and LinkedIn updates. 20 years of wondering if you hate me, if you're happy, if you turned out to be the man I hoped you'd become despite my failures." The raw pain in James's voice cut through Marcus's anger. This broken man with graying hair and regret in his eyes was nothing like the mythical figure who'd haunted Marcus's childhood. The selfish dreamer who'd abandoned his family for freedom. "I don't hate you," Marcus said carefully. "But I don't know you either." Tommy laughed bitterly. "Join the club. He's been my full-time dad for 16 years, and I'm still figuring out who he is. One thing I know for sure, he's not the monster she's made him out to be." He jerked his head toward Elena. "And he's not the saint he pretends to be either. He's just a guy who made some shitty choices and spent 2 decades trying to figure out how to fix them." Elena's composure cracked slightly. This wasn't going according to her script. Tommy was supposed to reinforce the narrative about irresponsible men, not humanize James or challenge her version of events. "Perhaps," Elena said coolly, "Tommy doesn't understand the full context of his father's choices." "Maybe not," Tommy agreed. "But I understand manipulation when I see it. You didn't bring Dad here for Marcus's benefit. You brought him here to win an argument." Sarah stepped into the room, having listened from the hallway. "She's right about one thing, though. This is about choices, but not the ones she thinks." Elena turned her laser focus on Sarah. "Miss Rodriguez, I don't recall inviting you to participate in this family discussion. You made me part of this family's dysfunction the moment you started paying me to spy on Marcus," Sarah shot back. "And I think everyone in this room needs to hear what Tommy just said. This is about manipulation, not love." James looked confused. "Manipulation? Elena, what is she talking about?" Elena's carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel. She'd expected James to serve as proof of male irresponsibility, but instead he was asking questions that threatened to expose her own methods. "James," Elena said with forced calm, "perhaps you should take Tommy and—" "No." Marcus's voice cut through her suggestion with authority he didn't know he possessed. For once in my life, I want to have a conversation without you controlling the script. He looked at his father, really looked at him for the first time. James Chen wasn't the selfish monster of Elena's stories or the romantic rebel of Marcus's childhood fantasies. He was a flawed man who'd made a devastating choice and lived with the consequences. "Why did you really leave?" Marcus asked. James glanced at Elena, then back at his son. "Because I was 26 years old, terrified of being responsible for your future, and your mother had already planned out every detail of your life from kindergarten through graduate school. I felt like a bystander in my own family." Elena stood sharply. "That's not—" "It's true," James continued, his voice growing stronger. "Elena, you meant well, but you controlled everything. Our budget, our social calendar, Marcus's education, even what clothes he wore. When I tried to have input, you had reasons why my ideas wouldn't work. Good reasons, logical reasons, but you wanted to make mistakes," Elena finished coldly. "You wanted the right to fail, even if it meant Marcus suffered the consequences." "I wanted the right to try," James corrected. "I wanted to be his father, not just another person following your instructions." Tommy watched the adults with the clarity of someone not invested in their historical grievances. "So you left instead of fighting for what you wanted. And she spent 20 years making sure Marcus never had to choose between security and independence, because she was so afraid he'd make the same choice you did." The truth hung in the air like smoke. Elena's control hadn't been born from malice, but from terror. The bone-deep fear that the men she loved would choose freedom over family, leaving her to build everything alone. But in trying to prevent abandonment, she'd created a different kind of prison. Marcus looked around the room at his fractured family, the mother who'd loved him by controlling him, the father who'd hurt him by leaving him, the brother who saw through everyone's pretenses, and the friend who'd betrayed him to protect someone else. For the first time in his life, Marcus understood that every choice carried a price, and the only question was whether you chose to pay it yourself or let someone else pay it for you. "I need to think," Marcus said, echoing his words from Elena's office. But this time, he meant something different. Not thinking about Elena's ultimatum or James's explanations or Tommy's insights. Thinking about who Marcus Chen actually was when nobody else was pulling the strings. The tension in Elena's living room was suffocating. Marcus stood frozen between his parents, while Tommy scrolled through his phone with studied indifference. The silence stretched until the doorbell chimed. "That will be Mrs. Liu," Elena said, rising with practiced grace. "I asked her to join us." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Mrs. Liu, Elena's elderly neighbor and former business mentor, was Elena's moral authority. If Elena had summoned her, the conversation was about to carry the weight of community judgment. Mrs. Liu entered with measured steps, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun that emphasized the intelligence in her dark eyes. At 73, she remained sharp and formidable. She took in the scene and her expression grew troubled. "Elena," she said in Mandarin, her voice carrying authority. "What have you done?" Elena responded in English, defensive but respectful. "Mrs. Liu, thank you for coming. I thought it was important for you to meet James and help Marcus understand." "Help him understand what?" Mrs. Liu interrupted, switching to English. "Help him understand why his mother has been lying to him for years?" The words hit Elena like a slap. Mrs. Liu was one of the few people whose disapproval Elena genuinely feared. "I have been watching this family for 20 years, Mrs. Liu said, moving to the center of the room. "I watched you build your empire while raising Marcus alone. I admired your dedication, but I also watched you turn love into control, protection, into imprisonment." She looked directly at James. "And you, the father who ran away instead of fighting for his place. Do you know what your leaving cost? Not just Elena and Marcus, but the entire community that watched this family break apart." James flushed. I was young. You were a coward, Mrs. Liu said bluntly. But Elena, you were worse. You used his abandonment to justify controlling every aspect of your son's life. Elena's composure cracked. I protected him. I ensured he would never experience poverty, failure, abandonment. You ensured he would never experience life, Mrs. Liu corrected. You built him a golden cage and called it love. Tommy looked up with interest. This was the first time he'd seen an adult directly challenge Elena's narrative. Mrs. Liu, Sarah said quietly, there's more. About how Elena has been controlling Marcus's career. Mrs. Liu nodded grimly. I suspected. Elena, did you think I wouldn't notice the shell corporations? I helped you structure your first business deals. I know your methods. You knew? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I suspected, Mrs. Liu corrected. When you started your company, the funding structure was too clean, too favorable. Real investors ask harder questions. Your mother's investors seemed unusually generous and hands-off. Marcus felt another pillar of reality crumble. Even Elena's mentor had seen through the deception. But I said nothing because I hoped Elena would find wisdom to tell you the truth herself. I hoped she would learn that real love requires trust, not control. Elena's voice was tight with anger. You don't understand the pressures I faced. Raising a son alone, building a business in a country that didn't want me to succeed? I understand perfectly, Mrs. Liu interrupted. I came here with $50 and a suitcase. I built my restaurant from nothing while raising 3 children whose father died in a factory accident. I know about struggle, Elena, but I never confused protection with imprisonment. The comparison cut deep. Mrs. Liu's success story was legendary, a widow who'd built a restaurant empire while raising children who'd become doctors, lawyers, engineers. Your children made their own choices, Elena said weakly. And some broke my heart, Mrs. Liu admitted. My youngest dropped out of medical school to become an artist. For 2 years, I barely spoke to him. But you know what I learned? Love means accepting that people you care about have the right to make mistakes, even if those mistakes hurt you. Tommy spoke up, his voice carrying surprising maturity. That's what my dad never learned either. He was so afraid of making the wrong choice that he chose not to choose at all. And now, Marcus is stuck in the middle of everyone else's fears. James looked at his younger son with pride. When did you get so wise? When I realized all the adults in my life were too scared to tell the truth, Tommy replied. Dad, you left because you were afraid of failing as a father. Elena, you controlled everything because you were afraid of being abandoned again. And Marcus has been trying so hard to prove he's not like either of you that he never figured out who he actually is. Mrs. Liu nodded approvingly. The boy speaks truth. Elena, James, you have both allowed fear to make your choices for 20 years. And Marcus, you have been so busy reacting to their fears that you have never discovered your own strength. Marcus felt the weight of every gaze. For the first time, he was being asked not to choose between Elena's control and James's abandonment, but to define himself independently of both their failures. I don't know how, Marcus admitted. Every choice I've made, every success, it's all been part of someone else's plan. How do I know what's real? Mrs. Liu moved closer, her expression softening. You start by accepting that your mother's love is real, even if her methods were wrong. You accept that your father's remorse is real, even if it cannot undo his abandonment. And then you decide what kind of man you want to be, knowing that both success and failure will be truly yours. Elena's voice was barely audible. What if he chooses to walk away? What if I lose him the way I lost James? Then you will have learned that love cannot exist without the freedom to leave, Mrs. Liu said gently. And Marcus will have learned that independence means accepting responsibility for the consequences of your choices. James stepped forward. Marcus, I can't undo 20 years of absence, but watching you from afar, seeing what you've accomplished, you're already the man I hoped you'd become. The question isn't whether you're like me or your mother. The question is whether you're ready to be yourself. Sarah moved closer. Whatever you decide, I want to help you build something real. Not because Elena's paying me or David's offering investment, but because I believe in what you can create when you're truly free to try. Elena looked around at the people she'd tried to control. Mrs. Liu, what should I do? You should let go, Mrs. Liu said simply. You should trust that the son you raised has the strength to succeed or fail on his own terms. Tommy stood, somehow commanding the room's attention. You're all acting like this is some huge philosophical decision, but it's actually pretty simple. Marcus, do you want to spend the rest of your life wondering what you could have built on your own, or do you want to find out? Marcus looked around the room one more time, seeing his fractured family with new eyes. All of them flawed, all carrying their own fears, all waiting to see if he had the courage to step outside the story they'd written for him. I know what I have to do, Marcus said finally, but I need to do it alone first. All of you have been part of this story so long that I can't think clearly with you watching. Elena started to protest, but Mrs. Liu placed a gentle hand on her arm. Let him go, Elena. Let him choose. As Marcus walked toward the door, he heard Tommy call after him. For what it's worth, I think you're going to surprise everyone, including yourself. Marcus stepped into the San Francisco night, carrying the weight of truth and the terrifying freedom of choice. For the first time in his adult life, no one was telling him what to do next. Marcus sat alone in his Soma apartment at 3 a.m, surrounded by the detritus of his unraveling life. Elena's ownership transfer agreement lay on his coffee table beside David Kim's investment proposal and Sarah's handwritten letter of resignation from Innovate Tech. 3 pieces of paper that represented 3 different futures: comfortable, captivity, uncertain freedom, or rebuilding from nothing. The apartment felt foreign despite being his home for 2 years. How much of this life was real? The lease Elena had helped him secure, the furniture that arrived perfectly coordinated, even his address in the heart of San Francisco's tech corridor, all of it now suspect, potentially orchestrated by his mother's invisible hand. His phone buzzed constantly with messages he couldn't bring himself to read. Elena, James, Sarah, David, even Tommy. Everyone wanting to know his decision, offering advice, expressing concern. But Mrs. Liu's words echoed in his mind, the courage to live without them. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus was truly alone with his thoughts. A soft knock interrupted his solitude. Marcus opened the door to find David Kim holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression of careful neutrality. Couldn't sleep either? David asked, offering one of the cups. Marcus stepped aside to let him in. How did you know I'd be awake? Because I've been in your position before. Different circumstances, but the same fundamental choice between security and authenticity. David settled into the chair across from Marcus's couch. When I was 25, I discovered my first venture capital fund was backed by my father's money. Everything I thought I'd achieved independently was just an extension of his influence. The admission surprised Marcus. David had always seemed like the embodiment of self-made success, confident, independent, emotionally healthy in ways that Marcus envied. What did you do? I walked away, gave up the fund, returned the money, started over with nothing but my reputation and whatever contacts I'd made legitimately. David's expression grew thoughtful. Hardest thing I ever did. Lost most of my friends, my apartment, my sense of identity. Spent 6 months sleeping on couches and questioning whether I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But you succeeded anyway. Eventually, it took 3 years to build a real fund from scratch, 3 years of rejection, failure, and genuine struggle. But when success finally came, it was mine. David leaned forward. Marcus, I'm not going to tell you what to choose, but I can tell you that the fear of starting over is worse than the reality of it. Marcus felt a weight lifting slightly. David's story proved that authentic independence was possible, even if the price was higher than he'd imagined. Another knock interrupted them. This time, Sarah stood in the hallway holding a laptop bag and looking like she hadn't slept in days. I know it's late, she said quietly, but I need to show you something before you make your decision. She entered without waiting for permission, setting up her laptop on the coffee table with practiced efficiency. The screen filled with code, clean, elegant algorithms that Marcus recognized as his own work. This is the AI platform we built together, Sarah said. Every line of code, every breakthrough, every innovative solution. This is genuinely yours, Marcus. Elena may have funded the company and orchestrated the opportunities, but she couldn't fake talent. Sarah pulled up more files, technical specifications, patent applications, peer reviews from industry experts who'd studied their work without knowing about Elena's involvement. Look at these reviews from MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon. These are people who evaluate technology based purely on merit. They don't care about funding sources or corporate structures, and they all say the same thing. This platform represents a genuine breakthrough in AI-driven logistics. Marcus stared at the screen, seeing his work reflected back through objective eyes for the first time. The innovation was real. The technical achievements couldn't be fabricated or purchased. The question isn't whether you're capable, Sarah continued. The question is whether you're willing to prove it without Elena's safety net. David nodded approvingly. Sarah's right. Your technical skills, your vision, your ability to solve complex problems, none of that was manufactured. Elena provided resources and removed obstacles, but she couldn't give you talent you didn't already possess. Sarah pulled up one final document, a business plan she'd apparently been working on since their conversation at the cafe. If you want to start over, really start over, I've been thinking about how we could do it. No shell corporations, no hidden funding, no family connections, just us, our skills, and whatever investors we can convince legitimately. The plan was thorough, realistic, and terrifying. It projected 18 months of financial uncertainty, significant personal risk, and no guarantee of success. But it was also authentic in a way that Marcus's current life had never been. What about your mother's treatments? Marcus asked. Sarah's voice was steady. David's offered to help with the medical costs, not as payment for information or influence, but because he believes in what we're trying to build. It's still charity, but it's honest charity. Marcus looked between his two allies, people who were offering to help him rebuild without demanding control over the outcome. The contrast with Elena's suffocating protection was stark. There's something else, David said carefully. I've been reviewing Elena's corporate structure all day. The shell corporations she used to fund Innovate Tech, they're legally vulnerable. The concealment of beneficial ownership could be challenged in court. You think we could win? I think we could force a settlement that gives you genuine ownership of the intellectual property you developed. It wouldn't be easy or cheap, but it's possible. The third option, fighting Elena legally, had seemed impossible when she'd presented it in her office. But with David's resources and expertise, it became a real possibility. Marcus stood and walked to his window, looking out at the San Francisco skyline where other entrepreneurs were probably facing their own moments of truth. The city lights twinkled like stars, each one representing someone pursuing their version of success. If I sign Elena's contract, Marcus said slowly, I keep everything I think I've built, but I'll always know it wasn't really mine. If I walk away completely, I lose 3 years of work but gain the chance to build something authentic. If I fight her legally, I risk everything on the possibility of reclaiming what I thought was already mine." "That's about right," David agreed. Sarah closed her laptop. "Whatever you choose it for yourself. Not because you're trying to prove something to Elena or James. Not because you're afraid of disappointing people. Choose the future you can live with." Marcus turned back to face them, seeing two people who'd offered him something Elena never had: support without strings, help without control, partnership without manipulation. "I know what I want," Marcus said finally, "but I need to tell Elena. Myself, face to face. She deserves that much." David and Sarah exchanged a look that suggested they'd expected this answer. "We'll be here when you get back," Sarah said. "Whatever happens." As they gathered their things to leave, David paused at the door. "Marcus, for what it's worth, I think you're about to surprise everyone, including yourself." After they left, Marcus sat alone with his decision, feeling something he'd never experienced before: the weight and freedom of choice made without external pressure. Tomorrow, he would face Elena one final time. But tonight, for the first time in his adult life, Marcus Chen knew exactly who he wanted to be. The terrifying part was that it had nothing to do with who anyone else expected him to become. Marcus stood outside Elena's mansion at 8 in the morning, David Kim's business lawyer beside him, and a folder of legal documents in his hands. The overnight rain had left the Pacific Heights streets gleaming, and the morning fog was just beginning to lift from the bay. He felt different than he had 2 days ago, calmer, more centered, as if finally knowing his own mind had given him a gravity he'd never possessed. The lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, no relation to the Meridian Global executive, was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in corporate fraud cases. David had insisted on her presence, not for intimidation, but for witness protection. "Elena Chen is formidable," he'd warned. "Don't face her alone." Elena answered the door herself, dressed impeccably despite the early hour. Her expression showed no surprise at seeing the lawyer, only a flicker of what might have been disappointment. "Marcus," she said warmly. "And Ms. Walsh, I presume. Please come in. I've prepared coffee." They followed Elena to her home office, where the ownership transfer agreement still lay on her desk, alongside new documents that hadn't been there before. Marcus noticed a legal brief with his name on it. Elena had been busy overnight as well. "I assume you've come to sign the ownership agreement," Elena said, settling behind her desk with practiced composure. "Though I'm curious about the legal representation, surely we can handle this as a family matter." Marcus remained standing, the folder clutched in his hands like armor. "Actually, I've come to reject your offer entirely." Elena's smile never wavered, but something shifted behind her eyes. "I see. And what alternative are you proposing?" "I'm proposing to walk away from everything. The company, the technology, the office space, all of it. I'm starting over with nothing but my actual abilities and whatever partnerships I can build. Legitimately." For the first time since he'd known her, Elena looked genuinely surprised. She'd prepared for him to fight for control, to negotiate terms, to demand concessions. She hadn't expected complete abdication. "That's..." Elena paused, searching for words. "That's incredibly foolish, Marcus. You're throwing away 3 years of work, millions of dollars in development, relationships with major clients." "I'm throwing away 3 years of illusion," Marcus corrected, "and choosing to build something real instead." Elena stood, moving. To her window in the gesture Marcus had seen countless times when she was preparing to deploy her most powerful arguments. "You think you're being noble, but you're being naive. The technology industry doesn't care about your principles. While you're starting over with nothing, your competitors will dominate the market with inferior products simply because they have better funding." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "But at least when I succeed or fail, it will be genuinely mine." Elena turned back to face him, and for the first time, Marcus saw genuine fear in her eyes. You could fail completely, lose everything, end up like your father, jumping from project to project, never achieving anything lasting. Or I could succeed beyond anything I've achieved under your control, Marcus replied. The point is, it will be my choice to make. Jennifer Walsh spoke for the first time, her voice professionally neutral. Mrs. Chen, my client has also asked me to inform you that he'll be challenging the intellectual property assignments he signed under the Shell Corporation arrangements. We believe there are grounds for fraud based on concealment of beneficial ownership. Elena's composure finally cracked. Fraud? I gave you everything. Opportunities most entrepreneurs can only dream of. You gave me opportunities while hiding. The fact that you were the source, Marcus said. That's deception, no matter how well-intentioned. Elena moved back to her desk, pulling out the legal brief Marcus had noticed. If you want to discuss fraud, perhaps we should discuss your fiduciary duties as an employee of my company's. Every decision you made, every piece of code you wrote, every client relationship you developed, all of it was done using my resources while you believed you were working for yourself. Jennifer Walsh's expression sharpened. Are you threatening my client with legal action? I'm explaining the reality of his situation, Elena replied smoothly. Marcus seems to believe he can simply walk away from his obligations. But the intellectual property he's developed belongs to the entities that funded its creation. If he attempts to replicate that technology elsewhere, he'll be in violation of multiple non-compete agreements and trade secret protections. Marcus felt the walls closing in again. Even in rebellion, Elena had anticipated his moves and prepared countermeasures. But instead of the familiar panic, he felt something unexpected, relief. Then I won't replicate the technology, Marcus said simply. I'll develop something entirely new. Elena stared at him as if he'd announced plans to fly to the moon. Something new? Marcus, you've spent 3 years perfecting AI-driven logistics. That's your expertise, your competitive advantage. No, Marcus interrupted. My competitive advantage is my ability to solve complex problems with elegant code. The specific application doesn't matter. He opened his folder and pulled out documents of his own, Sarah's business plan, David's investment proposal, and a resignation letter that formally terminated his employment with all of Elena's shell corporations. I'm resigning from Innovate Tech and all related entities, effective immediately. I'm relinquishing any claim to the intellectual property I developed under your funding, and I'm starting a new company focused on AI applications in renewable energy, a completely different market where our existing technology has no relevance. Elena's face went pale. She'd expected him to fight for what he thought was his, not to abandon it entirely and start fresh in an unrelated field. Renewable energy? Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. You know nothing about that industry. I know nothing about any industry until I learn it, Marcus replied. That's what entrepreneurs actually do. They identify problems and develop solutions. They don't just execute predetermined plans. Jennifer Walsh placed additional documents on Elena's desk. We're also serving notice that Mr. Chen will be cooperating with any regulatory investigations into the corporate structures used to fund Innovate Tech. While no formal complaint has been filed, the Securities and Exchange Commission takes a dim view of concealed beneficial ownership in private investment schemes. Elena's mask finally slipped completely. You would destroy me to prove a point about independence? I'm not trying to destroy you, Marcus said, his voice softening slightly. I'm trying to save both of us from a relationship built on control instead of trust. You're my mother, and I love you. But I can't love you properly while you own me. Elena sank into her chair, looking older than Marcus had ever seen her. Everything I did was to protect you, to ensure you'd never experience the uncertainty I faced when your father left. I know, Marcus said gently. But Mom, the uncertainty. You are protecting me from, that's called life. And you can't love someone completely while trying to control their ability to live it. Elena looked up at him with tears in her eyes for the first time since his childhood. What if you fail? What if you lose everything and end up alone? Then I'll pick myself up and try again. Just like you did when James left. Just like you did when you came to this country with nothing. The difference is, it will be my failure to learn from, not someone else's failure I'm protected from. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents that represented the dismantling of everything she'd built for him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I don't know how to let go. Start small, Marcus suggested. Start by trusting that the son you raised has learned something from watching you overcome every obstacle life put in your way. Jennifer Walsh gathered her documents efficiently. Mrs. Chen, you have 30 days to respond to our formal notices. Mr. Chen's resignation is effective immediately. As they prepared to leave, Elena called after them one final time. Marcus. He turned back to see his mother looking fragile and human in a way that reminded him of the woman who'd read him bedtime stories and taught him to believe he could accomplish anything. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Terrified, but proud. Marcus walked back to her desk and, for the first time in years, hugged his mother without feeling like he was surrendering something essential about himself. I love you, Mom, but I need to find out who I am when you're not pulling the strings. As Marcus left Elena's house with Jennifer Walsh, he felt the weight of 28 years of expectation and control lifting from his shoulders. The future was uncertain, potentially difficult, and entirely his own. For the first time in his adult life, that felt like freedom. 6 months later, Marcus stood in a converted warehouse in Oakland, watching Sarah debug code on a second-hand laptop, while their 3-person team worked around a folding table that doubled as their conference room. Ecologic Systems was nothing like Innovate Tech, smaller, scrappier, and perpetually underfunded. Their AI platform for optimizing solar panel efficiency was still months from market-ready, and their bank account rarely held more than a few $1,000s. It was the most satisfying work Marcus had ever done. Got it, Sarah announced, her voice carrying the excitement of someone who'd just solved a particularly elegant problem. The algorithm is finally learning to predict weather patterns accurately enough to maximize energy capture during cloud coverage. David Kim looked up from his investor calls, grinning with genuine pleasure. He'd taken a hands-on role in their startup. Not as a silent benefactor, but as an active partner who challenged every decision and celebrated every breakthrough. The contrast with Elena's invisible manipulation was striking. David's involvement felt like collaboration rather than control. That's our proof of concept, David said. I think we're ready to start talking to real investors. Marcus felt a familiar flutter of anxiety, but this time it was accompanied by excitement rather than dread. Real investors meant real scrutiny, genuine evaluation based on merit rather than hidden influence. It was terrifying and exhilarating. His phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. Family dinner tonight? Mom's been cooking all day. Fair warning, she's nervous. Marcus smiled. The weekly dinners had started 3 months ago, tentative affairs, where Elena practiced the unfamiliar art of being a mother without being a manager. The conversations were sometimes awkward, often emotional, but always honest in ways their relationship had never been before. I need to head out, Marcus told his team. Family dinner. Sarah looked up with understanding. The Chen family's journey toward healthy relationships had become something of a team interest, partly because everyone had been affected by Elena's previous manipulations. Tell your mom I said hi, Sarah said, and thank her again for the contract with her solar supplier. It's nice to earn business on merit rather than surveillance. Elena's gradual transformation had been perhaps the most surprising development of the past 6 months. Forced to confront the consequences of her controlling behavior, she'd begun the difficult work of rebuilding relationships based on respect rather than manipulation. Her introduction of eco-logic to her business network had been strictly voluntary, with full disclosure of her relationship to Marcus. Marcus drove across the bay to Elena's house, noting how different the journey felt now. Instead of the familiar dread of potential confrontation, he felt the warm anticipation of spending time with family who were learning to love each other authentically. Elena opened the door wearing an apron dusted with flour, her usually perfect appearance charmingly disheveled. "Marcus, perfect timing. James just arrived with Tommy." The casual mention of James still felt surreal. Marcus's father had moved back to San Francisco 2 months ago, not to reunite with Elena, but to build a genuine relationship with both his sons. He'd rented a modest apartment in the Mission District and taken a job with a small renewable energy consulting firm, work that was meaningful rather than lucrative, a choice that spoke to his own growth. "Something smells incredible," Marcus said, hugging his mother with the easy affection they'd developed as Elena learned to express love without strings attached. "Mrs. Liu's dumpling recipe," Elena admitted. "She's been teaching me to cook without trying to control every variable. Apparently, some of the best dishes require accepting uncertainty." The metaphor wasn't subtle, but it was genuine. Elena's friendship with Mrs. Liu had deepened as the older woman helped her navigate the transition from controlling parent to supportive one. They found James and Tommy in the living room, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion about climate policy. Tommy was arguing with the passionate intensity of youth, while James listened with the patience of someone who'd learned the value of actually hearing other perspectives. "Dad thinks carbon taxes are more effective than renewable energy subsidies," Tommy announced as Marcus entered. "I think he's missing the point about technological innovation driving market adoption." "Both approaches have merit," Marcus said, settling into the conversation with ease that would have been impossible months ago. "We're seeing it firsthand at EcoLogic. Government incentives help, but the real change comes when the technology becomes economically superior." James nodded approvingly. "How's the latest prototype testing?" Marcus launched into an explanation of their progress, noting how different it felt to discuss his work without worrying about hidden agendas or concealed motivations. James's interest was genuine. Tommy's questions were insightful, and Elena's attention was supportive without being invasive. "Dinner's ready," Elena announced, and they moved to the dining room where Marcus had endured so many controlled conversations over the years. As they gathered around the table, Marcus realized that this was the first family dinner where everyone was present by choice rather than obligation or manipulation. Elena had invited them. They'd chosen to come. The distinction mattered more than he'd expected. "I have news," Elena said as they served themselves. "I've been working with Mrs. Liu on a new project. We're starting a mentorship program for immigrant women entrepreneurs. Real mentorship, not the kind where I try to control every decision." Tommy grinned. "Character growth? I like it." Elena laughed, a sound Marcus rarely heard but was beginning to treasure. "Your brother's influence, I think. Watching him walk away from everything I'd built for him taught me that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the confidence to succeed without you." James cleared his throat, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I have news, too. The consulting firm offered me a partnership. It's not much money, but it's genuine recognition of what I've contributed." "Dad, that's amazing," Marcus said, meaning it. James's journey toward stability and purposeful work had been inspiring to watch. "It means I'll be staying in San Francisco permanently," James continued. "Not to recreate the past, but to be part of whatever future we build together." Elena reached across the table and briefly touched James's hand. Not a romantic gesture, but an acknowledgement of their shared commitment to doing better by their children. "Speaking of the future," Tommy said with the dramatic flair of a teenager, "I got accepted to Stanford. Early admission." The table erupted in congratulations and questions. Tommy's academic achievements were entirely his own, earned without family manipulation or hidden influence. His pride was infectious. "I want to study environmental engineering," Tommy continued. "Maybe work with companies like Ecologic someday. You know, actually help solve climate change instead of just arguing about it." Marcus felt a surge of pride in his younger brother, followed by the realization that Tommy represented something precious. The possibility of growing up in a family that supported dreams rather than controlling them. As dinner wound down and conversation turned to lighter topics, Marcus looked around the table at his reconstructed family. Elena, learning to love without controlling. James, building stability through meaningful work rather than grand schemes. Tommy, growing up with the security of authentic relationships, all of them flawed, all of them still learning, but all of them committed to choosing growth over comfort. "I should get going," Marcus said eventually. "Early morning tomorrow. We're presenting to potential investors next week." "How do you feel about it?" Elena asked, and Marcus could hear the effort it cost her not to offer advice or connections. "Terrified," Marcus admitted, "and excited. It's our work, our presentation, our future on the line. Whatever happens, we'll have earned it." Elena smiled, and Marcus saw genuine peace in her expression. "That's all I ever really wanted for you. Not success handed to you, but the strength to create it yourself." As Marcus prepared to leave, Tommy pulled him aside. "You know what's weird? This is the first time our family has ever felt like a family. Messy and complicated, but real." "That's the difference between being controlled and being loved," Marcus replied. "Control feels safe until you realize it's also a prison. Love feels scary until you realize it's also freedom." Marcus drove back to Oakland through the November evening, past the lights of a city full of dreamers and entrepreneurs, successes and failures, people taking risks, and people playing it safe. Ecologic's future remained uncertain. They might succeed spectacularly, fail completely, or achieve something modest but meaningful. The outcome mattered less than the knowledge that whatever happened would be genuinely theirs. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Chen was living a story he was writing himself. The ending remained unwritten, and that felt like the greatest gift he'd ever received. The price of independence had been higher than he'd imagined. Not just the comfortable success Elena had created for him, but the certainty of predetermined outcomes. In return, he'd gained something more valuable: the right to succeed or fail, on his own terms, surrounded by people who loved him enough to let him be himself. As he pulled into his apartment complex, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Just heard from the beta testers. They love the new algorithm. Tomorrow's going to be a good day." Marcus smiled, pocketing his phone and walking toward Cy. His modest apartment, rented with his own money, furnished with his own choices, home to a life he was building one authentic decision at a time. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but entirely his own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.